The morning air was cool and heavy with mist, the kind that curled above the calm water and made the whole lake look like a secret place hidden from the rest of the world. The man stepped outside his cabin with a mug of coffee in one hand and his fishing bag in the other. He was looking forward to another quiet morning on his small paddleboat. For him that boat was not just a boat, it was freedom, it was peace. It was the sound of oars dipping in water and the joy of being away from noise. He had built that dock himself with his late father, and every plank of wood carried memory. He breathed deeply, feeling grateful that this lakefront was his private place. Or at least that was what he believed until today. As he placed his coffee down and began walking toward the dock, a strange smell cut through the mist. It was faint at first, like someone burning trash far away, but as he got closer his chest tightened. He knew that smell too well. It was smoke, sharp and bitter. He hurried his pace, eyes squinting through the fog, and then his heart dropped. Flames were licking the side of his paddleboat. At first it was only a small flicker near the stern, but within seconds the fire roared to life, climbing up the wooden seats, cracking and snapping as dry boards fed the blaze. The orange glow reflected on the water, turning the calm lake into a fiery mirror. He shouted, a raw sound of anger and shock, his voice echoing across the water. Neighbors began to step out from their houses. Drawn by the sight, they gathered near the road that overlooked his property, whispering to each other, some pointing fingers, but none of them moved to help. His chest pounded as he grabbed a bucket from the dock and tried scooping water to throw at the fire. But it was already too late. Every splash hissed against the flames only to vanish in smoke. The fire had grown too strong. He staggered back, sweat dripping down his forehead, his fists shaking. It was then he saw her, the HOA president. Standing tall among the crowd, arms folded across her chest, her lips curled into a smug little smile that made his blood boil. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look worried. Instead she leaned to the neighbor beside her and whispered something. They both chuckled. The sound carried like poison through the morning air. He clenched his jaw, rage mixing with confusion. Why was she smiling while his boat was burning? Why were none of these people helping him? And then, as if on cue, the wail of sirens cut through the silence. His head snapped toward the road. 2 police cars rolled in fast, their red and blue lights flashing against the mist. His gut twisted. His first thought was that someone had called them to report the fire, maybe to help. But the moment the doors opened and the officers stepped out, the look on their faces made his stomach sink. They weren't here to put out flames. They were here for him. Neighbors stepped back to make room, whispering louder. The HOA president smirked wider. The man froze, trying to process the scene, his boat still burning behind him. Flames hissing and crackling, smoke rising into the sky. Yet the police were walking straight toward him as if he was the crime. His heart pounded harder. Why would police come for his burning boat? What story had been told to them? Was this fire an accident? Or was it a trap carefully set to pull him into a bigger fight? He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. The officers looked serious. Already pulling out notepads, already asking questions before he could even breathe. Neighbors leaned closer to listen, their faces filled with fake concern. But their eyes glowed with curiosity, like they had been waiting for this moment. The man stood there with smoke in his lungs and heat against his back, realizing in that heavy moment that this was no simple fire. This was the beginning of a war he never asked for, a war that had just landed right at his dock, and every heartbeat screamed. The same question in his head, who had done this, and why were they trying so hard to make him the enemy in his own land? The mist swirled, the flames raged, and the hook of fate tightened around him, leaving him trapped between fire, neighbors, and the law. The fire had already reduced the paddleboat into blackened ruins. The water hissed as charred pieces of wood sank slowly, smoke still rising like a dark flag in the sky. The man stood stiff, his hands trembling not from fear but from anger. And the police officers were circling him as if he was some criminal who had set his own boat ablaze. One officer asked sharp questions. Where were you when the fire started? What time did you come outside? Did anyone see you near the boat before the flames? His words cut like knives and the man could hardly believe it. Instead of looking at the burning wreck, instead of searching for signs of arson, they were staring at him like he was guilty. Neighbors stood in a half-circle just beyond the property line, some crossing their arms, some whispering into phones, others simply enjoying the show, their eyes wide as if this was entertainment. The HOA president stepped closer with her smug face, speaking softly but loud enough for everyone to hear. She said the boat had been an issue for a long time. It was against the HOA regulations. It was a hazard. She said she had warned him many times but he never listened. Now here we are, she added with a smile that made his blood boil. The officers took notes, nodding slightly, and he could feel his rights slipping through their pens. He raised his voice, saying, "This is my property, my dock, my lakefront, and my boat. The HOA has no right to tell me what I can or cannot keep here." But his words seemed to vanish in the smoke. Nobody backed him. Nobody supported him. Even the neighbors who had once waved to him in passing now looked away, as if siding with him was dangerous. One officer finally told him to calm down, that they had to investigate reports made by the HOA. The man almost laughed. "Reports?" he asked. "What reports? Who reported that I burned my own boat?" His voice cracked with fury. The officer only said that the HOA claimed he had stored gasoline cans carelessly and maybe the fire was caused by his negligence. The man felt the ground shift under him. He had never stored anything like that near his boat. He kept the area clean. He knew it was a lie. His fists curled tight and his eyes went to the HOA president, who was still smiling like a snake. He realized then that this was no coincidence. This was not an accident. It was a setup. They wanted his boat gone. They wanted him in trouble, maybe even dragged to court. The idea sent a chill through his spine. He remembered how in past months the HOA had been sending warning letters, demanding he remove his dock, demanding he stop fishing from his own lakefront. They had fined him for small things like paint color on his cabin shutters. They had tried everything, and now they had burned his boat and called the police to finish what letters could not. His chest heaved with breath as he struggled to remain calm. The officers asked him to give a statement. He spoke with steady words, saying clearly that the fire was not caused by him, that he suspected someone else set it, that he believed it was deliberate. The officers exchanged looks but wrote it down. Still their eyes carried doubt. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some smirked, some shook their heads. The president whispered again to a board member beside her. They both laughed under their breath. The man's heart was a storm of fury. He wanted to shout. He wanted to drag them into the flames they had caused. But deep inside he knew rage would only give them power. So he stood silent, clenching his jaw, smoke filling his lungs as he stared at the ruins of his paddleboat. Then one thought came clear in his mind like the sun breaking through fog. If they thought this fire would scare him into surrendering, they were wrong. If they thought police pressure would break him, they had miscalculated. He was no fool and he was no coward. He would not only defend his name, he would show them the truth. But to do that he needed more than anger, he needed proof. The idea grew inside him as the crowd dispersed slowly, the officers telling him they would stay in touch, the neighbors drifting away with gossip already ready on their lips, the HOA president being the last to leave, pausing only to say in a sharp, sweet voice that maybe now he would learn to follow the rules. He did not answer her. He only stared at the smoldering water where his boat had been, his reflection broken by ripples of ash. He whispered under his breath that this was not over, not by a long shot. He walked back into his cabin, locked the door, and began to think. His father had always told him that the land they lived on was more than property. It was legacy, and somewhere in the old wooden lockbox stored in the attic were the deeds and papers to prove it. His heartbeat quickened as he remembered. Yes, the lakefront belonged to him, not to the HOA, not to the neighbors, not to anyone else. They might have burned his boat. They might have tried to turn the police against him. But the fight they had started would not end in smoke. It would end in truth, and he would make sure of it. That night the man sat alone in his cabin, the smell of smoke still drifting through the broken window he had left open. The moonlight glowed faintly on the lake, reflecting over the black water where the burnt pieces of his boat floated like ghosts. He could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes he saw the fire, the smug smile of the HOA president, the police officers scribbling in their notepads as if his guilt was already decided. Anger boiled in his chest, but beneath the anger was a strong determination. He needed proof, real proof, something that could not be denied. He climbed up the creaking ladder into the attic where dust hung heavy in the air. Wooden beams groaned under his weight as he reached for an old chest tucked against the far wall. This lockbox had been untouched for years, a relic from his late father. He pulled it down slowly, his fingers trembling, brushing away layers of dust. When he opened it, the hinges squealed. Inside lay a stack of yellowed papers, old photographs, and folded deeds wrapped carefully in leather. His heart beat faster as he unfolded them one by one, scanning the faded ink. His eyes widened as he realized what he was holding. The original land documents signed decades ago. They listed not just his cabin but also the dock, the shoreline, and even part of the lake itself as private property. His father had always said the lakefront was theirs, passed down from grandfather to son. But he had never seen the legal proof with his own eyes. Now the truth was in his hands. He traced the boundaries marked on the paper. Lines that clearly cut through the water and labeled the land as family-owned. Not community-owned. Not HOA-owned. His pulse raced. This was it. This was the weapon he needed against their lies. But as he kept reading, his excitement turned to dread. Stapled to the back of the file was a more recent document. Stamped only 3 years ago. A proposal submitted by the HOA to the county office. It was a request to redraw property boundaries, shifting the lake into community control. His jaw tightened. They had been plotting this for years, trying to erase his rights quietly. If the county had approved it, he might already have lost without even knowing. Sweat beaded his forehead as he realized how deep this fight ran. The fire was only one piece of their game. They wanted him gone, and they were willing to bend law, rules, and even destroy property to make it happen. He stacked the papers neatly, his mind racing. He needed to check county records. He needed to know if their proposal had been accepted or buried. But the thought of the HOA already manipulating officials made his stomach twist. Could he trust anyone in town, or would every door be closed in his face? Outside the window the lake shimmered in silver light, peaceful on the surface but hiding tension underneath. Just like the battle he was now trapped in, he sat back, clutching the papers tight. Memories of his father whispering about honor and legacy flooding his mind. He whispered to himself that they had underestimated him. They thought he was just one man against many. But one man with truth and proof was stronger than their whole circle of lies. He looked out at the ruined dock, the ashes still floating near the edge, and he felt a strange calm. The HOA had made their move. Now it was his turn. Tomorrow he would go into town. Tomorrow he would dig deeper. Tomorrow the fight would truly begin. For now he placed the papers into a sturdy folder, locked it back into the chest, and sat in silence as the night stretched long, his heart steady, his mind sharper than ever. The fire had destroyed his boat, but in its ashes he had found something far more powerful, the key to taking back what was rightfully his. The next morning the man woke with heavy eyes. He had hardly slept, but his mind was sharp. The memory of the fire was still fresh. The smell of smoke seemed burned into his clothes, yet the discovery of the papers gave him a strange kind of strength. He walked outside and saw the blackened skeleton of his paddleboat still floating half submerged near the dock. The water around it was stained dark with ash. The sight made his chest tighten. This was not just a boat lost to flames. It was a warning. It was a message that he was not welcome. As he stood there, a soft crunch of gravel broke the quiet. His eyes lifted to the road and his stomach turned. Nailed to the wooden post at the edge of his driveway was a folded piece of paper. Fluttering in the breeze, he walked slowly toward it, pulled it free, and read the words written in bold black ink. "Stop fighting us or you'll regret it." There was no signature, but the meaning was clear. The HOA wanted him silent. Fear prickled up his spine, but anger burned hotter. He crushed the paper in his fist and looked toward the row of houses across the lake. Curtains moved quickly as if someone had been watching. He shouted across the water that he would not be bullied. But his voice only echoed back to him. Lonely and cold, he stepped back inside his cabin, locked the door, and tried to think. He had neighbors who once smiled at him. People who borrowed tools, who asked for fishing tips. Yet now all of them acted like strangers. None dared to speak to him. They passed him with lowered eyes. Afraid of being seen as his ally, it was as if the HOA had wrapped the entire community in chains. Later that day he drove into town to buy supplies. But even there he felt the silent weight of stares, people whispering when he walked by, as if the story of the fire had already twisted into some rumor that painted him as reckless or dangerous. When he returned, another surprise waited. His mailbox door was bent and hanging open. The letters inside were torn, some scattered on the ground. Another act of quiet violence meant to rattle him. He picked them up slowly, jaw tight, each movement fueled by a deeper anger. They wanted to scare him into silence. They wanted to push him until he gave up. But they didn't understand that every attack only hardened his resolve. That night he sat at his desk, laying out the deeds and documents again, studying each line, each stamp, each boundary. He knew the papers were powerful but not enough on their own. He needed to prepare for war, not with fists or fire, but with truth and proof. He thought of the threats, the smashed mailbox, the burned boat. All of it pointed to one thing. They were desperate, desperate enough to play dirty, desperate enough to break the law themselves, and desperate enemies always left mistakes. He told himself he would find those mistakes. He would expose them. He would not just fight back. He would make the whole community see what the HOA really was, outside. The night grew darker. The lake reflected. Only a sliver of moonlight. The wind carried faint whispers from across the water. Maybe neighbors talking. Maybe just his imagination. Either way, he did not flinch. He sat there in silence, staring at the papers, whispering under his breath that no matter what came next he would not run. They had started this with fire and lies, but he would end it with truth and justice. The battle lines had been drawn, and he was ready to step across them. The following morning he rose early, long before the sun had burned away the mist on the water. The smell of smoke had finally faded, but the black scars on the dock and the charred wreck of his paddleboat still reminded him of the attack. His jaw was tight, his mind focused. Today he would go to the county office. He had to see with his own eyes if the HOA's attempt to redraw boundaries had been accepted or not. He gathered the folder of deeds and maps, tucked them into his bag, and drove down the winding road into town. Every mile felt heavier. The thought of officials already leaning toward the HOA made his chest ache, yet he pressed forward. When he reached the county records office, the building looked plain and quiet, its brick walls hiding shelves of truth inside. He stepped in, greeted coldly by the clerk behind the desk. Her smile faded the moment she heard his name. She shifted uncomfortably, as if she already knew the rumors. Still he insisted. He wanted to see land records tied to his property. After some hesitation, she led him to a small room where dusty files and digital records lined the shelves. The man's heart raced as he searched, finally pulling out the folder stamped with his property number. He flipped through page after page until his stomach twisted. There it was, the HOA proposal stamped and dated, their attempt to claim the lakefront as community property. But to his relief, the county had not approved it yet. It was marked pending review. Untouched in limbo, his hands trembled as he realized the meaning. They had tried, they had pushed, but so far they had not won. The land was still his, the legacy intact. But he also saw notes in the margin, handwritten by someone in the HOA, maybe copied into the file by accident. It said, "Need more pressure, owner will break soon." His blood boiled. They were using intimidation as strategy. The fire, the threats, the smashed mailbox, it was all connected. He snapped photos of every page, making sure he had copies, then closed the file carefully. The clerk gave him a nervous glance, whispering that sometimes the HOA came in asking about the same records. Her tone carried a warning, be careful. He thanked her quietly and left. Outside the sun had risen higher, but the warmth did nothing to ease his chill. He drove home fast, his mind storming with thoughts. Once inside, he spread the photos across his table, staring at them until his eyes burned. He realized he had enough proof to fight them, enough to stand before any court and show their lies. Yet deep inside he also knew this would not stop them. Desperate enemies never quit. They would come harder now. Maybe more threats, maybe more tricks, maybe even something worse. But he was ready. As he sat there, a sudden knock on the door jolted him. His hand froze. He walked slowly and opened it. Standing on the porch was a neighbor, a man who once borrowed his tools and shared a beer on summer nights. But now his eyes looked nervous, shifting side to side. He whispered quickly, saying the HOA board had been talking last night, saying they wanted to push him out for good, saying he should leave before things got dangerous. Then, without waiting for a reply, the neighbor hurried away down the path, leaving the man frozen in the doorway, his chest heavy, his anger burning hotter than ever. He knew then that the fire had been only the beginning. The HOA wanted a war, and they were willing to destroy anything in their path. He stepped back inside, looked at the papers again, and swore to himself that no matter what came, he would not bow. The lakefront was his, the truth was his, and soon the whole town would know it. The day of the HOA meeting arrived. The man had circled it on his calendar the moment he saw the notice pinned to his gate. This was his chance, the moment to face them not with fists but with proof. He dressed in a clean shirt, packed the original deeds and the photos from the county office into a sturdy folder, and drove toward the community hall where the board always gathered. His stomach churned but his hands were steady. Outside the hall, cars lined the road. Neighbors streamed in, murmuring to each other, many of them casting side glances his way, some cold, some nervous, none offering a smile. He walked straight through the doors, the chatter dimmed, and all eyes turned. The HOA president sat at the center table with her fellow board members. Her lips curled into that same smug smile. Her voice rang sharp as she called the meeting to order. She wasted no time. She began by listing his violations, saying his paddleboat was dangerous, his dock illegal, his fishing activities disruptive. She painted him as a troublemaker, her words dripping with poison. The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others whispering like a jury already convinced. His fists tightened around the folder, but he waited until she finished her long speech about community safety and respecting the rules. Then he rose slowly, his chair scraping the floor. The hall fell silent. He walked to the front table and without a word laid the folder flat, snapping it open so everyone could see. His voice was calm but sharp. He said, "These are the original deeds, signed, stamped, and sealed. They prove the lakefront, the dock, and even part of the shoreline belong to me and my family. Not to the HOA, not to the community, but to me." Gasps rippled through the room. Neighbors leaned forward, some eyes widened, others looked confused. The president's smile faltered for the first time. He continued, holding up the photos from the county office, showing the pending proposal where the HOA tried to steal his land by redrawing boundaries. He read the note out loud. "Need more pressure. Owner will break soon." The crowd stirred louder now, voices overlapping, whispers turning into sharp questions. Who wrote that? Why would the HOA try to erase his rights? The president slammed her gavel on the table, shouting that the documents were old, that he was twisting facts, that he was trying to embarrass the board. But her voice cracked with panic. The man stared at her coldly and said, "You burned my boat, you lied to the police, you threatened me. But I am still here, and I will not break." The room exploded in noise. Some neighbors shouted at the board, others demanded answers. The president banged her gavel again and again, but the noise drowned her out. Sweat glistened on her forehead. She whispered something to the board member beside her, but his eyes looked uneasy. The man stood tall, letting the chaos roll. He had planted the seed of truth, and once truth was out, it could not be hidden. Finally the president declared the meeting adjourned, slamming the gavel one last time. She rose quickly and stormed out with her board, faces pale, steps stiff. The neighbors lingered. Some approached the man cautiously, asking to see the documents, their voices softer now, more respectful. He showed them. He explained what the HOA had tried to do. He saw doubt turning into anger on their faces. The tide was shifting, maybe not fully yet but enough. As he left the hall that night, folder under his arm, the cool night air hit his face. He felt a weight lift slightly from his chest. He knew this battle was not over. He knew the HOA would not surrender easily. But he also knew something had changed. The cracks in there. Power had begun to show, and once cracks appear, walls eventually fall. He walked back to his truck, the lake breeze following him, whispering like his father's voice, reminding him that the fight for truth had only just begun. The weeks that followed the meeting were heavy with tension. The man could feel the shift in the air every time he stepped outside. Neighbors no longer laughed freely in their yards. Conversations stopped when he walked by, and the HOA president's car began appearing near his property at odd hours, headlights off, watching from the shadows. He knew they were plotting their next move, and it came faster than expected. One cold morning a letter arrived taped to his door, thick and stamped with the seal of the local court. His hands tightened as he tore it open. Inside was a notice. The HOA had filed a lawsuit against him, accusing him of harassment, violation of rules, and endangerment to the community. The words twisted reality into a weapon, painting him as a dangerous man who refused to follow laws. His chest pounded, his jaw tightened. But when he looked at the folder of deeds on his desk, he felt calm. This was the moment he had been preparing for. They wanted a war in court. He would give them one. Days turned into weeks as the case moved forward. The courtroom became the new battlefield. The HOA president walked in every day with her lawyer at her side, her head held high, her smirk never leaving. She acted confident as if victory was already hers. She paraded witnesses, neighbors who nervously repeated her claims, saying his dock was unsafe, his boat was illegal, his attitude hostile. Each word twisted truth into lies. But the man sat steady, waiting. His lawyer, an old friend of his father, stood ready with the folder of evidence. When it was his turn, the deeds were placed on the judge's desk. The ink still bold despite their age. The signatures official and binding, the boundaries clear. Every word proving the lakefront was his private property. The courtroom fell silent as the judge studied them. The HOA lawyer stammered, trying to argue they were outdated. But the man's lawyer pulled out the photos of the pending proposal, the one the HOA had filed to steal his land, and read the note aloud. Need more pressure. Owner will break soon. Gasps echoed through the room. The president's smirk cracked. Sweat rolled down her temple. The judge's eyes narrowed as he asked the HOA lawyer to explain. But no explanation came. Only stutters and weak excuses. The man rose slowly, his voice calm but sharp. He told the court about the fire, the threats, the smashed mailbox, the false police reports, each piece fitting together like a puzzle that revealed the truth. The HOA was not protecting the community. They were targeting him, trying to take what was not theirs. The silence was thick, the weight of his words heavy in the air. Finally the judge leaned back, tapping the papers with his finger. His tone firm, he said. The evidence was clear. The land belonged to the man. The HOA had overstepped. Their accusations were baseless, and their actions questionable. The president's face drained of color. Her lawyer whispered urgently, but she pushed him away, fury in her eyes. She had walked into this court expecting to crush him. Instead she was exposed. The neighbors who had filled the seats looked stunned, some ashamed, some angry, realizing they had been manipulated. The man felt his chest rise with a deep, steady breath. He had not just defended himself. He had torn down their lies in front of everyone. But even as the gavel struck and the session ended, he knew the fight was not finished. The verdict was close. But the storm in the HOA president's eyes warned him. She would not let go easily. She had lost ground, but she still had venom, and he would need every ounce of strength for what came next. He stepped out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, folder clutched tight in his hand. The breeze from the lake carried across town, and though the war was not yet done, for the first time since the fire he felt hope, sharp and solid, burning brighter than the flames that had tried to break him. The day of the final verdict arrived like a storm. The man woke before dawn, his chest heavy but his spirit unshaken. He dressed in silence, packed the folder of deeds one last time, and drove toward the courthouse. The roads were lined with curious neighbors. Whispers followed him, some filled with pity, others with guilt, many with quiet respect. Inside the courtroom the air was thick. The HOA president sat stiff at her table, her lawyer flipping through papers with shaking hands, her eyes no longer smug but burning with desperation. The judge entered, his gavel striking hard. Silence fell like a curtain. The man sat tall, his lawyer beside him, the folder resting on the desk like a shield. The judge cleared his throat and began to speak. He explained carefully that the evidence had been reviewed, the original deeds were valid, the boundaries clear. The lakefront was private property belonging to the man and his family, not the HOA, not the community, but his. The room erupted in murmurs, gasps from neighbors, a sharp hiss of breath from the board members. The president's lips trembled as she tried to stand. But the judge's words cut her down. The HOA had acted outside its authority. Its fines, threats, and accusations were invalid. Worse, their attempt to alter boundaries without consent raised questions of fraud. The man's chest swelled with a deep breath as he realized it was over. The battle that began with fire and false reports had ended in truth. The gavel struck again, firm and final. The verdict was his victory. The president's face twisted in rage, her lawyer whispering frantically. But she ignored him, storming out of the courtroom with the board trailing behind like defeated shadows. Neighbors turned toward the man. Some with apologetic eyes, some with nods of respect. A few even came forward to whisper that they were sorry for believing lies. He simply nodded, his voice low, saying the truth always comes out. He walked outside into the bright afternoon, the sun reflecting off the courthouse steps. The folder still in his hand but no longer feeling heavy. It felt like a torch he had carried through fire. The breeze from the lake reached him, cool and gentle, reminding him of home. He drove back to his cabin, the charred remains of the paddleboat still floating near the dock. But instead of despair, he felt calm. He stood at the edge of the water, papers safe in his cabin, neighbors slowly gathering across the lake, watching quietly. This time not with judgment but with respect. The lake rippled gently, as if acknowledging his victory. He whispered that this land was his, this water was his, and no one would take it again. The HOA had tried to break him with fire, with lies, with the weight of false authority, but they had failed. The truth had burned brighter. He looked at the ashes of his boat one last time, then turned toward the dock, already planning to rebuild, stronger, better, a new paddleboat that would glide across the water free of fear. As he walked back to his cabin, The setting sun cast gold across the lakefront. The same lakefront that belonged to him, and in that light he felt the weight of generations, the promise of his father, and the victory of a man who refused to bow. The battle was over, the lake was his, and for the first time in a long time, peace returned with the water's gentle song.